The flight attendant had barely finished checking the last seatbelt when the captain's voice came through the cabin speakers, and one sentence made the woman sitting beside me stop breathing. "Good afternoon, everyone. This is Captain Rowan Mercer speaking. We're honored to have Mr. Callan Brooks with us today. Welcome home, Callan." The entire economy cabin went strangely quiet for a moment. The woman beside me slowly turned her head, staring at me as if she had suddenly realized she had been sitting next to a stranger she knew nothing about. She was Marlowe Sterling, the CEO of one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America, and she had chosen economy class because she wanted to travel unnoticed. I was a tired single father flying economy because I couldn't afford anything else. Neither of us knew that the captain's unexpected welcome would become the beginning of a journey neither of us would ever forget. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can create second chances and that people should never be judged by their clothes, their job, or the seat they can afford, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories about family, kindness, courage, and unexpected second chances. My name is Callan Brooks. I was 37 years old, a single father, and the owner of one of the least impressive bank balances in the airport. I worked as a maintenance supervisor for a small regional company, repairing industrial equipment and solving problems most people never noticed. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep a roof over the head of my 9-year-old son, Milo. Milo was the reason I woke up every morning before the sun. His mother had passed away 3 years earlier after a sudden illness, and since then, I had learned how to pack school lunches, braid hair for his school plays even though he had short hair, sign permission slips, pay bills, and comfort a little boy who sometimes woke up believing his mother was still alive. I had learned that being a father wasn't about having all the answers. It was about staying when life gave you every reason to run. That afternoon, I was flying from Chicago to Seattle because Milo had been accepted into a special summer science program that could change his future. The problem was that the program required a deposit I could barely afford. I had sold my old truck, picked up extra weekend shifts, and borrowed money from a friend just to get him there. Milo was already in Seattle with my sister, because I had been called to attend an emergency meeting at work before joining them the following day. I had promised him I would be there before his first program orientation. I arrived at the airport wearing a faded gray jacket and carrying a small backpack. Inside were my wallet, a book Milo had given me, and a photograph of the two of us at a lakeside picnic. I didn't own a laptop, expensive luggage, or noise-canceling headphones. I just had a cheap ticket and a promise to keep. When I reached my seat, I discovered that the woman sitting beside me looked like she belonged in an entirely different world. Marlowe Sterling was dressed in a simple cream-colored suit, but everything about her suggested wealth. Her watch alone probably cost more than my car. She had dark auburn hair tied neatly behind her head and an expression that made it clear she didn't enjoy small talk. I recognized her because her face had appeared on business magazines and television interviews. She was the 39-year-old CEO of Sterling Dynamics, a company valued at billions. I quietly took my seat by the window and tried not to bother her. She glanced at my worn backpack, then at the empty seat between us, and finally at me. I expected judgment. Instead, she simply nodded and returned to her tablet. The flight took off smoothly. For the first hour, neither of us said much. I looked through Milo's science workbook and made notes about the program schedule. Marlowe worked continuously. She received messages every few minutes, responded to emails, and occasionally closed her eyes as though carrying the weight of an entire company on her shoulders. Then turbulence hit. The aircraft suddenly dropped several feet. A few passengers gasped. Marlowe's hand tightened around the armrest. I noticed immediately. She was afraid of flying. I didn't mention it. I simply placed my hand on the armrest between us, keeping my movements calm, and told her that the turbulence would pass. She looked at me with surprise. For the first time, the CEO of Sterling Dynamics didn't look like a billionaire. She looked like a frightened woman trying not to let anyone notice. The turbulence lasted several minutes before the plane steadied. She thanked me quietly. I smiled and told her it was nothing. Then the captain's voice came through the speakers. That was when everything changed. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Captain Rowan Mercer speaking. We're honored to have Mr. Callan Brooks with us today. Welcome home, Callan. Marlowe slowly turned toward me. She asked if I knew the captain. I told her yes. Her expression changed. She wanted to know how. I hesitated because I didn't like talking about the past. But the captain had already said my name. There was no hiding it anymore. I explained that Rowan had once been my commanding officer. Marlowe stared at me. I told her I had served in the military years earlier before leaving to raise my son after his mother became seriously ill. I didn't call myself a hero. I didn't even like remembering most of that chapter of my life. I had simply done what needed to be done. Marlowe looked at me differently after that. But what she didn't know was why Captain Mercer had welcomed me home. 3 years earlier, during an overseas humanitarian evacuation, our convoy had been attacked. Rowan had been injured and trapped inside a damaged vehicle. I had gone back for him. I had carried him through smoke and debris while explosions shook the ground around us. He survived. I never talked about it. But Rowan remembered. He had never forgotten the man who had refused to leave him behind. The cabin returned to normal, but Marlowe remained quiet. Eventually, she asked why someone like me was sitting in economy after doing something like that. I laughed softly. I told her that life didn't always reward people according to what they had done. Sometimes you simply did the right thing and kept moving. She looked out the window. Then she told me something I hadn't expected. Her father had served in the military too. He had died when she was young. After his death, her mother had worked 3 jobs to keep Marlowe in school. Marlowe had spent her entire life believing that success was the only way to repay her mother's sacrifice. She had built a company, made millions, and become one of the most powerful women in the country. Yet she admitted that she couldn't remember the last time she had simply sat with her mother without checking her phone. I told her that sometimes people spend years chasing the things they think will prove they love their family, only to discover that their family wanted their time more than their money. She didn't respond. But her eyes became wet. A few hours later, the plane began its descent. Then Marlowe received an urgent message. Her assistant had discovered that her mother had been hospitalized unexpectedly. Marlowe froze. The confidence disappeared from her face. She immediately tried calling, but there was no answer. I watched her struggle with the fear of losing the person who had given her everything. I told her to call the hospital directly. She did. The news wasn't good, but her mother was alive. The flight landed in Seattle. Passengers began gathering their belongings. Marlowe stood quickly and started toward the exit. Then she stopped. She turned around and looked at me. She asked where I was going. I told her I was heading to my sister's house to see Milo. She asked if I needed a ride. I smiled and said I could manage. She insisted. Outside the terminal, her driver was waiting with a black luxury SUV. Marlowe told the driver to take me to my sister's house first. I tried to refuse again, but she told me that after what I had done for her on the plane, allowing her to help me was the least she could do. During the drive, she received another call. Her mother had been moved into intensive care. Marlowe asked the driver to change direction. She was going straight to the hospital. Before she left, she handed me a card. She told me to call if I ever needed anything. I thanked her. Then she walked into the hospital. I thought that was the end of our strange encounter. I was wrong. The following morning, I arrived at Milo's science program and found him waiting near the entrance. He ran toward me. I lifted him into my arms. For the first time in weeks, I felt like everything was going to be okay. Then a black SUV pulled up. Marlowe stepped out. Milo looked at me with confusion. I introduced them. Marlowe smiled and handed him a small package. Inside was a science kit she had purchased after learning about his program. Milo's face lit up. But Marlowe wasn't there simply to give him a gift. She told me that her mother had survived the night. She had also told her mother about the man she had met on the plane. Her mother wanted to meet me. I didn't understand why. Until we reached the hospital. Marlowe's mother was weak, but conscious. The moment she saw me, she began to cry. She told me she knew my name. I was confused. Then she explained. Years earlier, when her husband died, she had struggled to keep Marlowe's future alive. A military family assistance program had quietly helped her with housing and expenses. The anonymous donor who had contributed the largest amount had been me. I had forgotten. It had happened during a fundraising program for families of fallen and injured service members. I had donated almost everything I had saved. I had never expected anyone to know. Marlowe's mother had spent years wondering who had helped her. Now she finally knew. She reached for my hand. She told me that because of that anonymous kindness, Marlowe had been able to stay in school. And because Marlowe stayed in school, she built the company that employed thousands of people. One small act had traveled through generations. I stood beside her hospital bed with tears in my eyes. I realized something that day. We rarely understand the full impact of what we do for others. A kind word. A helping hand. A sacrifice nobody sees. A decision to go back for someone when everyone else tells you to keep moving. You may think the moment disappears. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it travels. Sometimes it changes another person's life years later. Marlowe eventually asked me to join her company as head of a new employee support program designed to help working parents, military families, and employees facing financial emergencies. I accepted, but not because of the money. I accepted because I wanted other fathers like me to know they weren't alone. Months later, I was invited to speak at Sterling Dynamics. Marlowe introduced me to thousands of employees. She didn't introduce me as a former soldier. She didn't introduce me as the man who had saved her father's friend. She simply said I was a man who had taught her that success wasn't measured by how high you climbed. It was measured by how many people you helped on the way up. I looked into the audience and saw Milo sitting in the front row. He was smiling. And suddenly, I understood why I had spent so many years sitting in economy. It wasn't because I was less important. It was because I had spent my life investing in things money couldn't buy. Family. Loyalty. Courage. Kindness. And love. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire. Every comment and share helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope. And I have one special request before we end. Comment, kindness is never wasted, if you believe that the good we do for others can come back in ways we never expect. Because you never know who is watching when you choose to be kind. You never know whose life you might change. And you may never know how far one small act of courage can travel. Callan had boarded that airplane believing he was simply a tired single father sitting in an economy seat. But when the pilot welcomed him by name, a powerful CEO discovered that the quiet man beside her had a story worth more than any first-class ticket could ever buy. And sometimes, the greatest journeys don't begin in first class. They begin with a simple seat beside a stranger, a little kindness, and the courage to never leave someone behind.